Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining today's education session focused on how you can connect the market-leading business analytics tool Power BI to your JD Edwards ERP system. So just a few housekeeping items before we begin. We will leave some time at the end for a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please enter those in the Q&A panel. And we'll also be making this recording available to you. So look out for that if you'd like to reference it and use it in the future. So my name is David Kettinger, and I've worn many hats over the past 7-8 years at Preferred Strategies, but currently I'm leading the marketing team. And we have an exciting presentation for you today. And we're fortunate enough to be joined by my friend and colleague, Ben Harrison, to walk us through two approaches to connecting Power BI to JD Edwards. So Ben has had a varied career, starting in aerospace engineering, then moving to construction before he finally focused on data analytics. And he currently serves as the VP of Product Management at Preferred Strategies. So we're lucky to have him here today to walk us through this process. And when Ben is not heads down in data, you can find him skiing or playing with his grandkids. He even makes his own wine and loves to travel. So with that, Ben, I will go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thanks, David. And not only do I make my own wine, but I drink it as well. So yeah, that's the purpose, I suppose.
Very good.
So here's our agenda. I'm excited about it. Power BI and JD Edwards are really cool together, and hopefully this will be really useful as you start thinking about how you want to connect Power BI and what your choices are and what are the implications of those choices. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Power BI. I'll go into the first method approach of it to attach kind of a direct connect, then talk about a better way and talk about the benefits of those. Then we'll go through the questions. So first, a little bit about Power BI. If you're not familiar with it, it's actually a whole ecosystem. It's not one single thing. It's meant to help process, visualize, and share data so you can make better decisions. It's made up of the three main components: the Power BI desktop, which is what I'll be using that a lot today. It's used to kind of create reports, design and create reports. The Power BI service is where once you've created a report, you publish it so that people can share and access it. That's where you're going to collaborate. And the third component is the mobile field tool that sits on your phone or your tablet and essentially reads any of those reports that are in the Power BI service. So you have that data with you anywhere and everywhere. So it's really cool ecosystem. Microsoft's taken this market by storm since they released it maybe 7 or 8 years ago. So it's the leading tool available right now. It's worth understanding how to use it in your business. One of the things that is important, though, it's by itself just a tool. So the data that goes with it, how you consume it, how you build it, it really is what makes it go. And it's not just the fact that the tool works well. If you think about traditionally how people got data out of JD Edwards, you had some legacy reporting tools. I used JD Edwards at the company I was with forever. I used Crystal Reports a lot to get that data out of JD Edwards. Then I'd often put it in Excel, and now you can put that into Power BI. So this is the traditional approach. It's very manual, very repetitive, very error prone, and essentially ungovernable. I would write reports, do a lot of process to it, publish them. My coworker, Heather, would do the same type of thing. I couldn't fix her report. She couldn't fix mine. So from a data flow, the timing, the issues that happen with this particular approach, this is what we would recommend you try to avoid to do. But I also recognize this is probably what many of you are doing today. So let's talk about what would happen instead. What I'm proposing is that you really want to get that transformation process really dialed down so that it's repetitive, it's governable, it's secure, and it's scalable. And we're going to talk about that as we're going forward. First, though, let's get into a demo and start looking at connecting data. So we're going to connect, create some reports and relationships and talk about how Power BI works. So right now I'm going to hop over to the Power BI desktop. I have a number of models open, and this is the one I wanted to start with. The very first thing you need is obviously to connect to the data. I downloaded the Power BI desktop. It's free. If you go to powerbi.com, you can see download the desktop tool. And I'd encourage you to do that if you haven't done that already. But I need to get data in order to make anything with Power BI. So I'm going to do that. And in my case, I've got a SQL Server database for JD Edwards. But I do want to point out, some of you are going to have an Oracle database, perhaps, or an IBM DB2 database. And there's a number of choices when it comes to connecting to those two other databases that you're going to have to work with your IT department to resolve. You can use these direct connects if your domain allows you access in this way. Many customers using JD Edwards, though, are using a different type of connection method, which is way down here. You can see there's dozens and dozens of options for connecting, and that's the ODBC connector. Let me just type it in here, ODBC, and that's another way to connect, and that might be what you're using. When I used JD Edwards, I had a IBM DB2 database. I used a ODBC type of connector called ODA, Open Data Access, and so if you're in DB2 or Oracle with your JD Edwards environment, you're going to need to consider which one of those methods you want to do to connect that. But I'm using SQL Server, so I would connect using SQL Server, and the first thing it's going to ask me to do is identify that. My server is called SQL Demo. I've got a database. This element here, the data connectivity mode, is really important for you to consider. There's two choices: import and direct query. So import means when I connect to the data set, I'm going to grab that data and bring it into my Power BI report. Direct query means that I'm just going to create a connection to that. And the nuances of this are really important. You think, oh, I'd like to have the direct query, but in fact, for analytics, that's not going to serve you as well. What that means is, as you're consuming the data and you're using the report, every time I drill down, I'll drill through or filter, it sends a query back to your source database. And if your source database is in use by payroll or AP, it's going to be using resources on that original JD Edwards data source that might impact your business, particularly if you're getting to large queries, lots of data. Importing now essentially is making an in-memory copy of that data that is going to give very fast analytics response. We recommend that you start with an import model and get that data you're looking for in the Power BI memory. It's highly compressed, highly accessible, so it makes a much better experience, end user experience. But think about those implications as you make that choice. I'm going to go ahead and say connect to my SQL demo database. When I'm doing so, I'm going to get to the JD Edwards data. And nice thing about JD Edwards is there's thousands of tables. So you're going to need to know a little bit about what you're looking for. I'm looking for general ledger data. So I might go ahead and say, give me the FO902 and click that. And I could load the data. Now I could load it directly. Most likely though, and I mentioned transformation is a really important thing, you're going to want to transform the data. Transforming the data within Power BI is done with a tool called Power Query. Power Query is a Microsoft product, been around for, at least 10 years. It's very powerful. It's very flexible. You can do lots of stuff with it. And when we'll talk about the transformation steps and the details in it, but essentially all the steps I'm talking about can be done here within Power Query. Now I've brought in previously the 901, the account master, the 911, the general ledger detail, the 902 is the general ledger summary table. I'm not going to actually bring that in there. I just want to point out that in the transformation process, Power Query is one option you're going to want to keep available and understand how that works. It is its own type of language. It uses a language called M. So there's some learning curve to be done in using Power Query, but transformation, we'll talk about those elements. You can do it here. That's one thing to keep in mind. I'm going to close that and not bring in the 902 data just because it's not really part of what I need to show you today. So I'm going to discard that. But that is simple. Get data, go to the server, bring the database in. What that means, though, is now I can start creating a report with that data. So I have done another page here just in Power BI, just so you know, a Power BI report can have multiple pages. You get more pages by just clicking new page, and you have, look at different data. I've gone ahead and brought in some data to this report. Based on that, just get kind of start over again. I'll get that visual blank. And what I did to start with is I went to the 901, the account table, and I said, bring me in the object. So I can quickly do OBJ. Now I happen to know all sorts of JD Edwards information because I've been doing this for so long. That's where connecting direct to the data is going to require you to know some things about JD Edwards that you need some domain expertise. I'm going to bring in the description field for that, and I'm going to bring in the actual amounts out of the 911 detail. That's the GLAA. But that's how simple it is. Right away, I've created right now some data straight out of JD Edwards, and I've done a couple different versions. I've chosen in this case to make that a table that's represented by that little table. I've made this one a bar chart that's represented here in this stack bar chart. I've made this particular visual as a tree map that's represented here. So quickly, I got a report. I could be going to town, but it's apparent right away, as I mentioned, that this data needs to be transformed. I know what GMOBJ is. I know what GMDL01 is. I know what RMO007 is, but many of my users, the people who are going to consume this report, don't know those fields and never will. Again, I have domain knowledge, and I need end users who don't have that domain knowledge to be able to understand this report. So what do I want to transform? Let's look. I've created a new page here with just some notes here for me to talk through. I need to transform, first of all, the table relationships. When I brought in the 901 and the 911, if I bring this, look at this model view here, I had two tables and no relationship between them, right? So this arrow wasn't there. I had to add that, which means I needed to know about what union or joined these two tables. It turns out, in this case, I'm using the AID field, the GM AID and the GL AID. And I create that relationship and define that. So now I can create a report based on that relationship. One of the things that you may not be apparent that is important to understand, I click that relationship. Within Power BI, there's a limitation that I can have a column related to a column. Many times when you think about reporting, you might say, I want company and account and business unit to be related to this other company, account, or business unit, so multiple columns. And in fact, that's not possible in Power BI. So as I make relationships, the transformation needs to include what makes the unique key or the join between these two tables. And you might have to create columns to join on in that transformation process. And again, Power Query might be a place that you do that. So back to my report, you need to create table relationships that will not exist out of the box. Decimals, it may not have been apparent, but when I look at this first report, and I brought this in, that regular employees, I think that's $3 billion. That's not right. It might be 3 trillion. That's a really big number. That's because JD Edwards doesn't store decimal points in their system. So that's actually, that last 35 is 35 cents. That .00 is a mistake Power BI made when it assigned a format to that type of number. So what you really need to do is start thinking about what are the transformations I need to make on that data. So I've created a field called amount, and I did that by creating a measure. Now you can create measures back up here. You just say create a new measure, and that's pretty powerful. New quick measures. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a bit. But what a measure really is just a formula that says I want a field called amount, and I want to divide that AA field by 100. That's going to get the decimals correct in this data. And in JD Edwards, if you connect straight to the database, you're going to have to do the decimal precision on any amount fields, because no amount fields in JD Edwards have decimals. So you need to know which ones are 2-digit decimal fields, which ones are 4. And so that's something you're going to have to add. And you want to do that in measures. Measures are going to be your friend. Eventually, I'm going to show you kind of a built out report, and we have thousands of measures in these reports. So another thing you want to do is rename columns. You notice that, in this case, I've got object and description, whereas before they were named GM OBJ. So the way I did that is I just came here into the visuals, and I said rename that field. So I came and said that one called RM OBJ. I like a GM OBJ. I'm going to call object. I'm going to call this one description. That one's amount because I already called it amount. But I've renamed all these columns, and you're going to have to do that again and again in this report. Again, that's part of the transformation to make it usable, is taking the cryptic JD Edwards terms and putting them to some sort of format that makes sense. So in this case, I've renamed those 3 fields. I renamed the GM 007, R007 field to be department, and I've renamed the GM MCU field to be business unit, so that the report makes sense. So there's a lot of columns that are going to be renamed. One of the things I didn't do here, though, if you look at my department field in this visual, it says 05, 01, 03, 04, 02. Which departments are that? It's probably maybe the Southwest Department or the Southern Department or the Canadian Department or whatever that case might be. That data is sitting, the name of that department is sitting in a category code master file, the F0005. And so I did not bring that data in. But if you want to start doing that, I'm going to have to add another table, figure out the join to that table, and then bring in the description. So I can, instead of saying 03, I can say that's the Northwest region or the Northwest department. So cat code lookups have to be built. It means adding a whole bunch more joins to more tables in the database. Data formatting is something really important to consider. You notice that this one came in, now it's got 35 cents, but every bit of data needs to be assigned a format, right? So some of these fields are DL01 is a text field, but I could have said that's a whole number field. So the data format needs to be defined. Where that's particularly important is data formats that look to be numbers but aren't. GLAA has that little sum there, so you know that is a number. But if I go scroll down here later, GLAN8, that's the address book record. That's not a number, but it thinks it wants to sum that. So I need to change that format to probably be a text. That would probably be what I want to do, and call it a text. I'm going to say, do not sum that data. It's even if I left it in a as a number, it's something I'm never going to sum. I'm never going to sum the address book record. So that column formatting has to be done for every column that you want to use in your report, because all by itself, Power BI doesn't know when a number is a number and when a number is just a placeholder. Like companies often are numbers, or the period number in the 911 field is a number, but it's not something you would sum. So you need to define those elements. The filtering is a very important question here. Now, there's two layers of filtering that I'd want to talk about here. One is, do I want to filter the data that I brought in here? So if I've got 30 years of data in JD Edwards, maybe I only want to bring in the last 3 years. So I would do that in that Power Query and say, just bring me in the years of data I want. Again, I'm making a copy of this in memory, so I want all the data I need. And ultimately, that data set's so compressed, it doesn't. It can take, 1 billion rows of data or more. One of our customers has 1.5 million rows of data in their general ledger, and we can bring it all into a data model. But you don't want to bring in more data than you need to, because it just takes up resources and time, processing time. So consider how much data you want, and you're going to do that by filtering. The other element of filtering is, this is an amount field that I just brought in GLAA. Well, I happen to know that if I want actual dollars here, I have to filter that amount by that ledger type. So there's going to be other ways to filter, and I might come down here and say, well, that's the amount field, but I want to go down to the ledger type out of this GLATLT. I don't know if I can find it here quickly. They're in alphabetical order. I'll just go search GLLT ledger type. And if I bring that data in as an object, I can actually now start filtering it here. Now, there's a lot of ways to create this filter to look. If I do AA actual amounts, then that's going to be actual dollars and pennies in that particular report. You can do the same result with measures. So we talked a little bit about measures already. I made that one measure called amount, but I could have gone here and say filter that value based upon ledger type. So measures are another way to create information, and that leads me to the next topic, which is time intelligence, right? So over here I say data filtered, and the next thing is date conversion and a date table. So time intelligence is a really important part about analytics, and it's really important to have it in your Power BI solution. So you think about year to date, month to date, quarter to date, those types of values are hard to do with JD Edwards data, mostly because the dates are Julian. So if I look down here, I happen to know that GLDDJ is the Julian GL date. Julian dates are just numbers. That's why they say sum. Obviously, I'd want to change that to not sum, but they're not very user friendly. So like the Julian date for January 30th of 2023, there's a number 2300030, right? So it's a sequential day, and it's really good for programming. So the people who wrote the JD Edwards programs love Julian dates because you can add 7 to get a week later, you can subtract numbers to get that. But in terms of understanding what day June 15th is, it's kind of really hard. I used to have a lookup table that I could go and say Julian date to actual Gregorian date. So Gregorian dates being what people are used to. All those built-in measures are built on Gregorian dates. So you're really going to need, besides to convert these dates to dates, you're going to also need to have a date table. Now, a date table, what's that even mean? When you're thinking about year to date, month to date, quarter date, and you're trying to understand what's happening in those periods, particularly if you're comparing this period to last period, if your detailed data is missing work days or Saturdays or holidays, there's nothing in the data set that knows that. But your calendar table, your date table will know that. It'll know which days are holidays, which days are work days, and you can start doing much better analysis if you have a date table. So if you haven't already built one or looked at building one, to make Power BI work right, you really have to have a date table so that you can make it work as well. That brings the next kind of transformation is the metadata layer. There's lots of elements to metadata. One of the things is that you can go through and pick an address record, for instance. And if I pick, something, and I could come through and say, well, that's a data category. Maybe it's an address, a place, a city, postal code, latitude, longitude. This is important to get the most out of your reporting capabilities, is to provide as much information about the data as possible. You're actually going to make other metadata things that are additional values. I created a field called amount, but I want maybe have revenue, which is a filtered amount by object type. Or I might have budget amount, which is a filtered amount by ledger type. All those things are metadata layers that are built into this model that make an end user be able to use it well. So think about that metadata layer and what has to be built into that. And the last thing I want to cover here on security is security. So if you think about what I did when I connected to the data, I went out and said, get data. I'm logged in as Ben Harrison at Preferred Strategies. When I hit JD Edwards, it gave me the data that I'm allowed to see as Ben Harrison. The last thing I'm going to do is publish this report to the service. When I publish this report to the service, it's going to say, Here's the data in Power BI. It doesn't recognize that security level. So if David Kettinger can see different rows of data than Ben Harrison can in the Power BI service, it doesn't know that, right? So one of the things you're going to need to do is add roles to your model. That's going to create security. That's going to start defining, I can see certain rows of data, David can see other rows of data. And you're going to need to consider this in your report creation stage as part of the transformation process. How am I going to define those roles? Where am I going to get that information? Our particular product, Quick Launch, can read your JD Edwards security tables and replicate that so that when you publish the data and David comes in through the Power BI data service, it's going to recognize that security rows. But you're going to need to plan for that in advance as part of this transformation process. So you can probably see that this is a lot of work. There's so much you can do. It's a really cool tool, but setting it up so that you can be successful is hard. But once I've published this data and it's out in the service, I need to now consider, how does that get refreshed? Now, I connect it straight to the SQL database. When I'm out in the service, there's a thing called a Power BI gateway that you're going to need to configure. And it's really just a traffic cop that says, go get the data from that source. And I'll show you what that looks like when we get to the service in a little bit. But the neat thing about this is it's automated. When I'm in the service, the Power BI service, and I can refresh the data, I'm not touching anything. I'm not downloading into Excel. I'm not manipulating it. This automated data flow is what you're going to want to have as you go forward with the Power BI desktop, so that the data in your service and that the people are using to make decisions on their job is automatically updated, and that they know that the data is current and correct. So I'm going to hop back to the Power BI, to the PowerPoint, and talk a little bit more about what that looks like. Just as a reminder, if we send out the PowerPoint later on, this is the layers of transformation that I've identified. Here's this representation of that transformation. Just a little quick kind of covering. I mentioned Power Query and M to do that transformation. Other choices are to use SQL. Again, we use that extensively. Still requires some domain knowledge, but it's another way to transform that data. Python is a third choice for this data transformation process, but you're going to need to transform the data. And so think through which tool you might want. One of the things that I am going to point out, though, is as you do this transformation, you're not going to just do it once. You're going to transform the general ledger data, then the sales data, and then the inventory data, and the purchasing data. And so ultimately, then you end up with all these data transformations that are tough to manage. I'm showing 6 on this chart, but if you just kind of proceed with this, connect to the data, transform it, and publish it, you're going to end up with hundreds of these Power BI data sets that are transformed, and it's very unmanageable. So the next step to think about is, how do I do that transformation more with a standard way? Another couple of the problems with that multiple transformation is, again, security is really hard to apply. Understanding the data sensitivity, because I'm connecting to JD Edwards directly. How do I make sure that I don't accidentally publish social security numbers or salary or personal data? You do have to have some technical expertise, either an M or SQL or Python. You need to have database domain knowledge. So I know JD Edwards, I understand the 901 and the 911, but most end users do not. You do want to be wary of the impact to your ERP system. So avoid that direct connect to the ERP system, because you could bring the system to a halt, makes everybody unhappy when payroll won't process. And the last thing is that whole data silos governance maintainability. So what we're proposing is this. Quick Launch is our product, and this is how it's built. It's represented by that blue cube. I'm going to use the word blue cube a lot in the rest of this presentation. Hopefully it will help you think about how this connectivity is different. It's still Power BI, but I can take any data source. In this case, the ERP system represents JD Edwards. But I can merge that with other data sources, and every one of our customers does that. No one just uses JD Edwards. You're using JD Edwards in Salesforce, JD Edwards in Pi, JD Edwards in Wonderware. There's all sorts of data, enterprise sources that you want into your enterprise data system, and you want it automated, and you want to be able to send that data to Power BI anytime you want. So what's that give you? It gives you centralized business logic. It gives you a scalable, maintainable, governable, and secure system. You can have that security replicate, and when whoever hits that blue cube, they're getting the rows of data back that you've allowed. But this is, to me, the most important thing, is to become data-driven, to get the most value out of Power BI, you need to shift content creation out of the hands of domain experts. That's the beautiful thing about Power BI. It's very intuitive. I have a coworker, Frank, who's never used JD Edwards. He came from another enterprise system, but I can show him our data model, and he can create a general ledger report, a sales report, because, and you'll see quick launch in just a minute, that content creation is the domain experts know where the data comes. Operational experts know what they need to see, and you want operational experts using Power BI to get the most out of the data. So back to a demo. I'm going to go and look now, instead of connecting to the live JD Edwards data, what happens if you take that blue cube and it's out in the Power BI service and you start connecting that way. So we'll have a couple examples here, and you'll be able to see, again, these charts. We can send them to you afterwards. So let me pop over to another one of my Power BI desktop reports. That's this one. And if instead, this is again just a blank Power BI desktop, I'm going to go get data again. And instead of going to SQL Server, I can go to Power BI datasets. Now, in fact, there's two ways I can go to that Power BI dataset. I can go to but there's a Power BI is really analysis services under the cover if you peel it back. So I can either connect either direction. I'm going to go this way for just a technical reason. I'm going to use what's called an XMLA endpoint, and I'm going to grab that connection string real quick and show you what that looks like. And it's important for me to show you this because of a nuance about connecting. So that would be the string. The nuance that I want to mention is that I'm doing connect live this time. Last time I told you to do import. So you've got your source SQL system or DB2 system or Oracle, and I said import into the memory system. But because I'm connecting to the Power BI data set, it's already in memory. It's already compressed. It's already optimized for reporting. So the beautiful thing is, if I connect to that, I'm not making a copy of that data. I'm using the pre-existing copy of the data. So think back to that one version of the truth. And this will be illustrated when we get into the Power BI service in a little bit. You want to use this Connect Live option instead. And you just are going out to Power BI. You can see that link there. I've already done that on a different report. So let me just hop over the report I did. That way you don't have to watch me log in twice. So what I've got here is the data that I've connected to in that blue cube. If I hover over the account table, you notice that says in the description, it's the 0901, the F0901. That's the exact same table I had before. But again, instead of showing GMOBJ, I have object and description concatenated, right? So the data's just ready for me to use. If you look at this particular item, that you can see that we've got a description there that's actually a mashup, one single table that merges the 911 and the 902 data. And there's reasons you want to do it that way. Again, making that's all done through that transformation process to make an end user report that's really, really helpful. In that, I have measures. I'd shown you one measure. I made an actual amount table, but I might want to say actual amount inception to date. That's because I have a calendar. I can also say actual amount maybe prior year inception to date. So that's where the calendar is going to add to that metadata layering so that you can quickly get content without a lot of knowledge of the data. In this case, I mentioned to you, these are measures filtered on the ledger type AA, but I can have measures filtered on the ledger type a budget amount, right? Or forecast amount, or just anything that you want. Or I could even look at no ledgers. I have other filtered measures or metadata layer measures where I'm having revenue for month to date, quarter to date, year to date. This is why I mentioned you end up with hundreds or thousands of measures so that end users can just say, I need to look at month to date or quarter to date or toggle between month to date and year quarter to date, so that you can create reports really quickly, really easily. So the depth of the field, I don't need to worry about the relationships here. I'm just dragging and dropping, but let's belabor that question a little bit, because I showed you last time when I came into this that I had relationships built. So if I bring in that general ledger detail table on this relationships tab, I need to get to the right spot, general ledger detail, drop it in there, and I right click and I say, show me the relationships. You can see I do have a centralized 902 and 911 surrounded by the asset table. So it says 1201, right? The document types table. So I can start filtering that. I've got the account table over here as well, right? So the 901. All these relationships are pre-built within the quick launch model, which is going to get you up and running so much faster and so much more effectively. But I noticed that when I was in this tab, I was seeing only the general ledger detail, but when I go to this other tab over here, the model view, I'm seeing all these tables. That's because that blue cube is not just the general ledger. The blue cube is everything, right? So what I need to show you is somewhere to get to that data. The point about this is it's a lot of data. I mean, you can see here, this, let me get drilled in a little bit, and I won't be able to show you it all. But again, that blue cube has a tremendous amount of information about it. The thing that's really important about this setup is this means that I can create reports that cross the fact tables. That means that I can look at maybe a sales order and say, do I have all the inventory on hand and that I need for that? And then maybe I'm short of inventory. So I got a sales order, I got inventory on hand. And the next question would be, oh no, I need to buy some parts. Who's the best vendor to supply those to me? When I bought them last, what was the order quantity? What was the delivery date? Maybe I need to, what was the average purchase price? All that data is going to be apropos of my question of, I need parts for the sales order. How am I going to get them on time? And I can see that data and that business solution because the blue cube does not just hold general ledger data. It holds accounts receivable data. It holds accounts payable data. And it holds inventory data. It's got it all in there so that now I've got this one version of the truth that tells me what's happening and what I need to do. This is where big insights come from. This is where the big improvements come from that are going to make a big difference in your business. So once I get a report here, I would go ahead and publish it. I'm going to show you what a published report looks like in the Power BI service and start talking about that, because that's really when we start getting to the big value proposition. So I'm going to switch over here. This is now, I've switched to a browser-based Power BI service. And the Power BI service, I've got lots of workspaces. I've got lots of reports. You've got bunches of ways to interact with the data. But this, in fact, is just the general ledger report that we provide with Quick Launch out of the box to kind of get you started. And I've got multiple pages on that. To kind of illustrate the power of that calendar, I mentioned to you the calendar function. I can just come through and say, well, I don't want for period 9, I'd like period 10 instead. Notice that's important because your calendar won't always be for many companies, calendar is not just January through December. You might have specialized calendars that are fiscally based. We used to work from April through March, but I've worked with people who use the National Retail Federation calendar, 445 calendars. And if you think of the out of the box time measures are really tied to a normal year to date in Power BI by itself means January through December. So to make it differently, you need to make sure your calendar table understands the nuance between, is this fiscal year, is this calendar year, is this fiscal period, or is this calendar period? And that would be part of that. But beyond the idea of switching the year and the period, I right now look at year to date. Year to date data is shown on the bottom trend. Trending is very important. I see different information when I look at month to date. My outlier in this case appears to be July of 2019, but I even see different data or different outliers when I look at quarter to date. So again, your calendaring function, if it's deep, provides great insight into that capability. Just to belabor the idea, I'm using this report, but this is that same data set, the general ledger detail, that account that I was using in the Power BI desktop. I've just pushed it out now to the service, and I can start doing these types of analysis. Just to belabor kind of the reporting capability of the service here, I'm again looking at quarter to date on expenses. It's another page on that. I might be looking at, well, let's go ahead and say, well, show me year to date on expenses. And I can see, oh no, I've got a real problem year to date expense wise. I wonder why. So I'm going to hover over that. I want to talk about tooltips a little bit. In Quick Launch, one of the things that you're going to want more information about is not just the data that you're displaying. In this case, I've got $600,000 of variance between budget and actuals this year. But that begs the question, well, what was the expenses last year? What was the budget this year? That's just the variance. So the variance is $600,000, but compared to what? $600,000 or $6 million. So the variance really is only important in the context in which it is, and tooltips are going to give you a lot more context. Obviously, I might want to drill down to say, well, what's going on there? And I see now it's in payroll distribution. Eventually, I want to drill through the details. And this is another important thing to think about your blue cube. When you're doing analytics, and Power BI is about analyzing things, what you're looking for is probably going to be verified or validated at the detail level. I'm going to come down and see that this year, that's what I've spent so far. The variance is the $600,000. But what is that? What are those transactions? Now, this is general ledger. I got a lot of journal entries. But if there's a misposted journal entry, something wasn't reversed, I'm going to find that here in the details. And it's going to help me make decisions about how do I improve my business. So again, that blue cube, that copy of the data, doesn't need to be a small summarized set of data. It can be as vast and as deep as you wish it to be. And in fact, that's what more customers find. The deeper and vaster it is, the more powerful it is for them. So we've been talking about reports, kind of those different elements of that. Just to belabor that idea of that model a little bit more, I'm going to go back to my workspaces here. And I want to look at a documentation report. So I've got here in that workspace a general ledger documentation. This is maybe another way to think about that one chart that showed the grid of all the data, or the Venn diagram, or the ERD diagram of all the tables are connected. So we've been talking about general ledger. There's the 901 or the 902 and 911 data. The 901 is this account data. But to belabor it, the blue cube is not that. The blue cube is this kind of spider web of databases. So as you start, then that's where you can start saying, look at sales, look at inventory, look at purchase orders or POs or purchase orders, AP, and start understanding a much broader context of what's happening in your business, because it's most not likely tied just to a sales issue or a work order issue or a transportation or even a quality issue. They're all related to each other, and the whole model then deserves to have a much larger set of data. You notice here I do have a lot of relationships, a lot of measures, thousands of measures, and to be complete, you're going to want that. So this model's complete, it's full, it's robust, it's automated. I can update it quickly, and so it's always current. But what's that mean to me in terms of of reporting. I want to just belabor one more thing and go back to this workspace. I'm going to look at lineage view and go down to what that model represents. Now I have a number of models in my report, but the big one is this one here, Quick Launch for JDE. And it's sitting in a workspace called Quick Launch Datasets. If I look at that and say, show me the reports that are tied to that, here they are. There's a lot of them. But if I click over on that folder, Quick Launch Datasets, that shows me where that data set is in my system. And here that is, Quick Launch JDE. It's sourced from the source SQL server of my JDE database. And when I start analyzing this, I can see a number of things about it. One, that it's certified. It was certified by David Kettinger. It has sensitivity levels. So think about governance and control. I've got this master data set that I now have auditability. If this is my financial source of record, I'm controlling it very tightly so that people can access it and get reports. It is made up of 59 tables, but it is one single data set that is the single source of truth that helps me improve my business. Beyond that, just to illustrate that blue cube, is feeding 293 downstream elements, 6 dashboards, 156 reports, over 16 workspaces. Again, so what that means is that if I connect to that blue cube and David connects to the blue cube, the source of data, we both pick actual amount prior year for April, we're going to get the same number every time because it's just one single report, one single data set. Very powerful in terms of governing your data. The one thing that, again, this topic today is all about Power BI and connecting Power BI to JDE Edwards data. But in fact, this data set's accessible from paginated reports, what used to be known as SSRS, or from Excel. So I can start accessing this data from really the tool for the job. Sometimes Excel is a really good analysis tool. It's a horrible database. It's a really terrible place to transform your data, but it's a wonderful place to slice and dice. Or paginated reports, sometimes you need to print a pixel perfect report for your surety or your bank. And so the same governed data set can be used for all these different tools, which again gives everyone singing from the same songbook when you start talking about reporting and elements. So the other thing just to reemphasize is this right now is coming from JDE Master, but this blue cube could have multiple sources to it. I could bring data in from multiple, from Salesforce, from Wonderware, and I could put them all in this one cube and feed all the reports I want to, no matter how many they are. So hopefully this is all kind of making sense and it's coming together as another way to connect to that data. One is, so let's get back and I'll kind of wrap this up. We talked about the connecting options. One is direct connect. Do you get automated data? The way we're doing it now, the way I used to always do it was download it to Excel, move it forward, and then look at it later on. That is manual and error prone. And so if you do this well, you've got this one version, quick launch, version of the truth. Self-service reporting is completely promoted. It is automated. The flow from JDE Edwards to Power BI can just be regularly done like clockwork. No user involvement required. It's much easier to manage one cube than 150 data sets if you're running particularly those legacy reporting tools. You can apply security across the entire cube so that everything's no one sees stuff they're not supposed to do. And the governance is important. I mean, the idea that governance is allowing me to have one way that I manage this data as opposed to 6 different ways is important. So the quick launch kind of framework that we've been talking about here, you're going to connect to the data, you're going to transform and organize it, you're going to use different tools to analyze it. We got pre-built dashboards. You probably want to visualize it. Visualizing data is how you get to these insights. People see things visually much more so than through data, through rows and columns of data. And the last thing is, this is a transition change. To become data driven means you're going to have to work hard at optimizing the use of that data. You need to train your people. You need to develop skills that you don't have, and what preferred strategy, that's what we're about. We call this quick launch, and it is a way to connect to JD Edwards data that is going to give you unprecedented access to the data and an unprecedented time. So, David, that's kind of the end of the presentation. Do we have questions so far?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, great job walking us through that. It's a lot of great information. We do have a few questions. We had two that were pretty similar. So how do you add custom JDE tables to the quick launch data model?
Okay, that's actually pretty straightforward. And one of the reasons people use JD Edwards is because of that customization. Just as we're going to read the 0005 to see what you call the different category codes that sit on all the dimension tables, we can actually bring in 55 tables as well. The company I work for created a F55 0006, kind of a business unit snapshot to bring in slowly changing dimensions, and any of those tables can be brought into this model.
Awesome. Okay. Next question we have is, can you edit the quick launch data set in the Power BI online environment? And I could take a stab at this one, Ben. So the answer is yes, but it's not recommended. And that's because the Power BI team is currently trying to bring parity between the data model editing experience in the Power BI service and the Power BI desktop, but it's not there yet. It's still a preview feature. You can enable it at the workspace level in the Power BI service, but again, it's not something that we recommend for enterprise analytics at this point in time. Next question. So why shouldn't we try to build this ourselves? Why do we need quick launch?
Oh, that's a really good question. We hear a lot. You see the elements of that transformation, but the actual truth is there's a lot in that. We've been doing this for essentially analytics, devoted to analytics for 20 years. The quick launch model really is the result of about 8 years of focused effort in the Power BI space. So quick launch, our value proposition is time to value and expertise about what not to do. So you can do it. We have had plenty of customers have gone off and dabbled and tried to build their own. Many of them come back to us after a couple of months and realize that it's quite an endeavor to build a model of this sophistication. And honestly, you can't do it as cheap as you can buy it. If you're going to devote staff resources or consulting resources, it's going to cost you much more to build it yourself than to just buy a quick launch out of the box.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. Last question we have here is really around the difference between what you showed and how to connect to DB2 and Oracle. I think you spoke a bit about that with the ODBC driver. Anything else that you'd want to add there?
Yeah, the DB2 and Oracle have their own SQL type of statements. And so those are very specific skills that are very unique to those databases. And they're pretty expensive skill sets to do that. Our recommendation would be to replicate that data as SQL. Even though you have a DB2 database or an Oracle database, the skill sets required to manipulate SQL data are much more affordable, much more accessible. You can Google it and get a lot more information. And so you certainly can connect to that data, but we would probably recommend you look at replicating those two databases to get the best value out of Power BI.
Well, I think that wraps up the questions that we had. So I guess we'll end by just saying thank you to everybody for taking your time to join us today. Hopefully you got some value out of today's session. And if you're interested, we have a few other sessions around Power BI coming up in the near future. We have a couple hands-on workshops, one focused on sales and one focused on financial reporting. And that's a 2-hour hands-on workshop where you'll actually create your own interactive reports that are similar to what Ben showed you today. And then we also have one that you're doing again, Ben, with Granite Construction, called Visualize Your Data with Confidence, which really looks at how you can move along the data visualization maturity curve. So if you're stuck in the table and matrix visualization world and you want to see how you can step up your data visualization game, that's a good one for you to check out. So again, thanks Ben, thanks everybody for joining, and hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.